This next one, judicial enforcement. This is the scariest thing. We have a document called the Constitution, and in the United States Constitution, one of the really great protections it provides is separations of power. So we have checks and balances uh, that that reinforces these separations of power to make sure that one branch can't unilaterally rule or make decisions, and that we have other branches to balance everything out. This section of the bill threatens that. It threatens that separation of power, that check, that balance. And it does so by making changes to judicial enforcement and how they can respond in cases. So with this bill, the federal government cannot be punished for breaking a court order unless the suing party has already paid a bond when the order was issued. The federal government can ignore lower court orders until the Supreme Court weighs in, and it also applies to court orders retroactively. Now, before I continue, I just want to explain this a little bit. So, most cases against the government are civil, and civil cases typically do not require bonds. That is a criminal case. Criminal courts, criminal law, those have bonds, and those bonds dictate whether or not um, an alleged perpetrator can stay in custody or whether they can go home. 97% of the court cases against Donald Trump right now are civil. They are not federal. So requiring a bond is new territory. There's not really precedent for this. Now, this is also a huge source of inequity and resources, because if there is a suing party that does not have the means to put forward a bond that the court deems is appropriate, or the language is appropriate, um, then there's no way to enforce any court order. So that means a party can sue the administration, and unless they have the money put forward in advance for a bond, the judge can all day long, give a ruling, and they can try to order contempt, but they can't enforce that contempt. And that is where the problem is when you can't enforce your ruling, your teeth have been effectively removed, and that branch of government no longer really has that power, or has power of enforcement. The fact that this also applies to court orders retroactively means that thousands of cases are kind of moot and point. Um, so an example here, so there's a new DOE rule that says schools don't have to provide one-on-one aids to certain students with disabilities. Now, the courts can rule in favor of the parents, but they couldn't hold the federal government in contempt if they ignore the ruling. And again, it doesn't, in this case, it doesn't look like there was a bond put forward. And because there was no bond, the courts cannot enforce that contempt order, and the federal government can ignore any ruling made by a court. It's the same thing with ICE agents. If ICE agents detain immigrants with protective status, same thing. If there's no bond put forward, the immigrants with protective status, on behalf of themselves or any attorneys that they put forward, if they don't have the funds put up in advance, ICE agents can detain whoever they want because there's no contempt order with teeth. There's nothing to physically hold them to that court order. The Senate version of this only applies to the preliminary rulings, so the things made in advance, or in the first stage. I don't want to say in advance, in the first stage of a case. But because of all these things, you can see my concern. To the challenge that this will present for us to maintain three separate branches with equal power.